Good evening. Welcome to the February 18th meeting of the Titusville Planning and Zoning Commission. If you will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please, Lori.
Chairman Aton.
Here.
Vice Chairman Childs.
Here.
Secretary Faison.
Here.
Member Garrod.
Here.
Member Scully.
Here.
Member Gellin. Alternate Member Seidler.
Here.
Alternate Member Troutman.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next item is approval of the minutes of February 4th. Anyone have any additions or changes or comments or a motion? Member Faison.
I move that we,
Secretary Faison, excuse me.
something to get used to. I move that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Minutes are approved. Quasi-judicial procedures, please.
Good evening. During the public hearing portion of the meeting, anyone wishing to speak on a quasi-judicial item must first sign a public hearing agenda card and sign the oath contained thereon. These cards are located on the table at the front of the council chamber. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. Witnesses may be cross-examined by the applicant, commission staff representatives, and such other representatives as authorized by the commission. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the city clerk. City clerk, have all persons wishing to speak before the Planning and Zoning Commission signed an oath card?
Yes.
Is there anyone else present who has not signed an oath card who wishes to speak on a quasi-judicial item? If so, please submit a card at this time. Have all agenda items been properly advertised?
Yes.
In the event that a member has received ex parte communication, verbal or written, the identity of the person with whom the communication took place and the substance of the communication must be disclosed, including opinions and facts discussed. Have the commissioners received any written communication which must be made part of the record at this time?
No.
Have the members visited any sites or spoken to any members of the public regarding any item to be reviewed?
No.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. This is our first petitions and requests from the public present. Anyone care to speak? I don't think so. All right. We have no old business, new business, item 9E.
Good evening. Christy Anderson, Senior Planner. This is the Fifth Amendment to the Tranquility Development Agreement, DA number 1-2025. There's a lot of information here, and I attempted to summarize it as best as possible, so if you just bear with me, I'm going to attempt to provide all of the bullet points to you. So the Tranquility Development is a mixed-use planned community with 2,404 residential units, including single-family, multifamily, commercial, preservation, and parklands. The planned community will be developed in multiple phases on approximately 340 acres located between the Indian River Lagoon and U.S. Highway 1 and Columbia Boulevard roadways. The property is designated with the city's comprehensive plan future land use of regional mixed use and conservation and is zoned regional mixed use. The applicant is requesting the approval of the amendment to the development agreement for the Tranquility Development, formerly known as Antigua Bay. The applicant is requesting amendments to the existing development agreement to increase building heights from 100 to 150 feet, waive certain small-scale plat qualification criteria, reduce required landscape buffers, allow accessory structures within the 50-foot road right-of-way building setback, and to allow phase clearing of land, stockpiling of fill, and stormwater and drainage improvements. The draft amendment is provided on page 24 of 126 of your packets. Please note that the attached alternate fill location plan provided on page 31 was provided by the applicant for informational purposes only and is not intended to be part of the agreement. So the amendment to section 3.4 of the agreement regarding maximum overall height is provided on page 11. Under the city's height overlay, section 29-126E, buildings may reach 150 feet only if they include two phases or two uses, mixed use, and provide a waterfront walkway and amenities along the Indian River Lagoon. It is unclear how interior buildings, those not located along the waterfront, would qualify for the 150-foot height allowance. The amendment does not explain how the buildings will meet the required mixed-use criteria. Based on the developer's interpretation, large portions of the Tranquility Project could construct 150-foot buildings without meeting the overlay requirements. The developer should comply with the existing height overlay provisions, which already allows increased heights for qualifying buildings. The request should be clarified and exhibits should be submitted identifying the number, location, and intended uses of the proposed 150-foot buildings. Amendment B, the amendment to section 3.6.8.1D related to the plating process to the variance and waiver section of the agreement is provided on page 11 of your packets. Staff has concerns about the developer's request to use the city's small-scale plat process. This process allows subdivision of up to 10 lots without new infrastructure and replaces the preliminary plat process, but the developer has not demonstrated compliance with the requirements of section 34-143 A, B, C, E, and F. The key issues include utilities. So small-scale plats allow only service laterals, no main extensions. Without details on the proposed development, particularly given the request for taller buildings, it is unclear whether water and sewer main extensions would be required. In relation to stormwater, each lot must have its own independent stormwater system and legal positive outfall, but the narrative proposes a joint managed system. Environmental constraints. There is no evidence demonstrating reasonable building areas free of wetland, endangered species, or environmental impacts. Regarding access, only driveway connections are permitted with no public or private street extensions. No supporting documentation has been provided regarding the proposed access. Public dedications, the plat must not require dedications to the public, yet items such as a lift station, tracks, or easements may be necessary. In all cases, no exhibit has been submitted to demonstrate eligibility for the small-scale plat process. Staff is recommending that the applicant submit an exhibit illustrating the proposed land division and supporting documentation to determine eligibility for the small-scale plat process. Alternatively, the developer may seek a variance from the Board of Adjustment and Appeals. Staff also recommends that the applicant clarify the proposed 125% landscape enhancement by specifically by specifying exactly how it will be calculated, for example, quantity, height, caliper, or a divine combination thereof. Regarding Amendment C to the agreement, Section 3.6.8.1E, related to landscape yard buffers to the variance and waiver section of the agreement, is provided on page 13 of your packets. The city's landscape code, section 34-394, requires 10 to 20-foot landscape buffers between commercial and residential uses. Where a 20-foot type B buffer is required, the developer proposes a type A 10-foot buffer enhancement to 125% of the required landscaping. The applicant has not addressed the separate 50-foot buffer requirement between the RMU 300 multifamily and the RMU 400 commercial tracts under section 33-44 of the regional mixed-use zoning standards. Staff recommends that the applicant clarify the proposed 125% landscape enhancement by specifically defining how it will be calculated, plant quantity, height, caliper, or combination for staff to properly evaluate. Amendment D, the amendment to section 3.6.8.1F related to accessory structures within the regional mixed-use perimeter 50-foot setbacks to the variance waiver section of the agreement is provided on page 13. A 50-foot building setback is required along arterial and collector roadways. And Phase 3 of the single-family subdivision, Parcel 1 of the north of the Addison Canal, 12 lots adjacent to US 1 have rear yards that encroach 25 feet into the setback. Without a waiver, accessory structures would not be permitted in these rear yards. Because this issue affects only a small number of lots, any waiver should be limited specifically to those lots. Otherwise, individual property owners could later request separate variances. Staff does not object to the waiver with the following conditions. Revise the agreement to allow accessory structures to encroach no more than 25 feet into the 50-foot primary setback along the arterial road. To submit an exhibit clearly showing that the waiver applies only to Phase 3 lots adjacent to US 1 in the RMU 200 subdistrict, Parcel 1. And to clarify the proposed 125% landscape enhancement. Amendment E, the proposed amendment is requesting to add Section 3.69 to the agreement related to phase clearing and stormwater drainage improvements, is provided on page 14 of your packets. Staff has identified multiple concerns with the proposed amendment and site development permit request. Regarding incorrect code reference, the amendment incorrectly cites Section 24-214 instead of 34-214. Scope of the request. The developer appears to seek approval to clear 30% of parcels, excavated land, store large amounts of soil for an unknown duration, potentially construct shared stormwater systems, and subdivide land using the small-scale plat process without submitting a final development plan. Regarding the Class 1 versus Class 2 permit, the developer did not justify requesting a Class 1 permit versus a Class 2 permit. Under Section 34-214, multiple Class 1 activities or any small-scale plat automatically requires a Class 2 permit. It is unclear how a Class 1 permit would apply. Regarding land clearing, without parcel size exhibit, staff cannot determine the impact of clearing up to 30% of each parcel, which could be substantial. Regarding tree preservation and clear cutting, the code and comprehensive plan prohibit clear cutting and require tree preservation plans tied to a final site development plan. Without a submitted plan, staff cannot evaluate or negotiate tree removal. Land alteration and storage. Section 30-83 prohibits land alteration and long-term storage of materials without a valid development order and limits pre-construction storage to 30 days. The amendment would effectively allow an indefinite soil storage contrary to the City Council action under Ordinance Number 52-218, which addressed public safety concerns. Phasing and bonding. No phasing plan was submitted. The amendment references bonding but does not specify what work would be bonded. Permanency of the site plan. Site development permits authorize permanent improvements, yet the request involves excavation and long-term soil stockpiling without clear stormwater or grading plans. Zoning and comprehensive plan consistency. Outdoor storage is not a permitted use within the RMU district. Long-term soil stockpiling may conflict with zoning regulations and comprehensive plan policies prohibiting commercial mining. A more appropriate process to allow the stockpiling of soil for several years as a final development order may be an amendment to the comprehensive plan and an ordinance with special clearance procedures. Staff is recommending that the applicant resubmit the amendment with clear justification for requesting a Class 1 permit instead of Class 2. Provide exhibits illustrating the proposed development, parcel sizes, phasing plan, tree removal, and preservation plan, and specific bonded improvements. Establish a time frame for on-site soil storage. Clearly define what development the permit would authorize and demonstrate compliance with Section 34-214. And alternatively, the developer may appeal the Class 1 permit qualification requirements to the Board of Adjustment and Appeals for variance. Staff's overall recommendation to this request is that the applicant resubmit the Fifth Amendment to the Tranquility Development Agreement with the supporting exhibits and changes recommended by staff. and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Anyone have any questions before we hear from the applicant? Member Garad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several questions as I read through your report and referencing the development outline provided, I presume, by the applicant that begins with developer requests the Fifth Amendment to the development agreement. In the second paragraph, the developer's statement maintains that the city of Titusville unilaterally placed the subject property into this overlay district. That's the contention by which later your report says, but you don't have a walkway along the river and some of the properties are not along the riverfront where the qualification goes. First question is that a correct statement? Did the city categorically overlay this property with this designation that allows a 150-foot building height?
That's correct. This property was already within that established overlay.
And that was an independent process, or was that as part of one of the development agreements that came prior to the Fifth Amendment?
I'm not sure. I know that this property is part of that overlay. It's not the only property that is included in the overlay, so I don't think it was specifically related to this a previous amendment.
Okay. In the case of the, second page. In the case of the 150 feet being allowed in a much more expansive area, what's the city's reasoning for having an excessive building height and looking at Titusville as a template for what is the average height, even if you went that far with an overlook of Titusville's skyline, with two exceptions, maybe three, there aren't tall buildings except along the river, wherein taller buildings exceeding 100 to 150 feet would be allowed transitioning towards US 1 at the end of the property boundary. They can currently go to 100 feet in that area, in the transition area, correct?
Correct.
And the exaction that the city's code requires if you're going to do a taller building is additional landscaping and building setbacks from your report. Is that how I understand it? To go to 150 feet, you have to perform certain things.
Yes, there's a set of certain criteria, one being that it has to be located along the Indian River Lagoon. A walkway must be provided, I believe outdoor seating, and some other criteria is also required in order to receive that height.
So not trying to be funny, but try to be an example. Central Park gives walkways through a wooded area to compensate for a surrounding tall building skyline. That's the only thing I can read in the theory, that a walkway along the river compensates for very tall buildings. Just asking.
I don't have extensive knowledge of when that overlay was established and what was utilized to come to those conclusions and how they're connected, so.
And to the extent the Fifth Amendment, I remain concerned, and this isn't the first example, so I just categorically say I remain concerned that in the analysis of an applicant's request, and in this case a development agreement that frankly is a contractual negotiation between two parties, the city, the proponent. You come to an agreement, then you have an agreement. Well, you come back and modify the agreement. I can understand modifying agreements in terms of events that change, and the applicant made sure that that was part of the background, that the market conditions should dictate what we do, and this is a response to the market conditions, that somehow 150-foot buildings is part of that market analysis. We must want more of those. So we need more area for 150-foot buildings. What concerns me is the emphasis on, but you could go get a variance. The reason I have that concern is because a variance is predicated on a hardship. There's parts of the report you talk about bona fide, and I remember several meetings back that whole discussion of whether you qualified for asking for a variance had to be based on a bona fide need. But the variance by its very nature is an exception to a rule. So it has to be based on something that's a hardship. And I can't understand why inference is made towards, well, if you don't do it this way, just ask for a variance. To me, it's like, well, if you're asking for something and you're not being granted that, you shouldn't get to go ask mom if it's okay if I go, because dad said no. And that's an underlying very concern I have, that in this particular discussion, we're agreeing to a rule that's different than other people's rule, honed and polished to this property for its purposes. And if it reaches an agreement as you recommend, why don't you go back to staff and finish negotiations so we're in concert together with a specific set of standards? It seems to me really unfair to even suggest, certainly imply, or moreover direct an applicant that what you would do is go get a variance. What does that do to the system that we're trying to arrive at, where you present this at the planning and zoning meeting, you analyze it, you make a recommendation to city council, they approve it, and you have an agreement. But then you turn around and say, but I'll go to the Board of Adjustment and get a variance. I'm not following that. I'm sorry, that's just my 2 bits for what it is.
I believe staff is attempting to provide the applicant an available option to pursue.
I understand, I fully understand that's an option you're providing. My concern is, at the instance you ask to negotiate a rule that is agreed upon, a contract, you infer that outside the boundary of the contract, you can go get a variance. That's like saying, why bother asking? Why not just go get a variance for the whole development agreement? And that's throughout this. It's the setback for the houses that got short lots.
Right.
It's the 150 foot, but the theme remains the same. I'm just.
I mean, I don't think staff was recommending that the applicant pursue a height variance specifically, but within that 50-foot setback, building roadway setback, I believe that variance could potentially be an option.
Again, it's two languages and we're both speaking. I'm not in the same language because I just don't comprehend why there would be at even best an inference that you would seek a variance under a contracted agreement you're trying to arrive at. And we haven't even got there to agree to the agreement.
Well, there are variances built into the development agreement to where the bona fide need is required to be provided. This building height overlay is inserted as a new height requirement, not necessarily a variance.
I guess it's kind of like in the concept of the development later, another question, with the requirement for the prohibition to accessory structures where they don't have the setback from the arterial highway, US 1. Are those lots platted yet that won't fit?
I believe they are.
They've been platted?
I believe they have.
Okay. That answers a question then. And then the other part of this where the very analytical description of the stormwater and the retaining of stormwater and the conversely speaking, what if we do this, it could allow you to do that, generally speaking, where unmitigated stormwater might have an outfall that wasn't controlled, to be short with it. Stormwater requirements aren't only specific to the city of Titusville. The stormwater requirements would be a state agency oversight, St. John's Water Management District. So I'm kind of wondering how the concern would be there for what if you did this the way you're going to create a potential problem because you haven't addressed stormwater in these initial phases, wherein regardless of what the city might or might not do, the Water Management District would come in and say, you can't just have stormwater run unmitigated to an outfall on adjacent properties or in the intercoastal Indian River or anything like that. And that just kind of puzzled me where that concern came from. Like there wouldn't be any police, so to speak, at the state level that would come in and step in and say, you can't continue the way you're going because this is impacting runoff in adjacent properties. Is there any, am I off base with my concern that it might be overreaching in a concern that this could happen when it probably won't happen?
No, that's a valid point. I believe that the, trying to.
That's okay.
I believe that staff is uncomfortable at this point with the amount of information provided as to where typically we have a detailed set of plans in order to make those determinations.
Sure, I understand. Last question, and that addresses this trade-off In mitigation to an increased building height, we're going to increase our landscaping buffers. And in mitigation to a reduced setback, separation between buildings, we're going to increase our landscaping. 125% is a number. What's 125%? To me, the question begs, if 100% was reached in the city's landscape code after the deliberations this board and others had, there's a whole schedule of planning that's part of that landscaping code where you have a potential, if you overplant something, to lead to its deterioration. In a well-suitable planted method, landscaping codes try to address that by considering the landscape's growth pattern, and in the terms, you have trees that choke out trees, and understory that chokes out understory. So you give away the 125% because the over 25% isn't going to survive on a good day anyway. That'd be like saying, I'll give you 1,000% more landscaping in that 10 feet than I'm required to do only 100% in 20 feet. I don't know how math works, but if you consolidate that in a smaller area, the potential's a negative impact. The landscape dies. At the end of the day, what good did that do? So I think your analysis of the landscape buffer goes back to what I read throughout this, is that this agreement, that's a very important word, the agreement's not ripened yet. We're not in agreement with it.
I would concur with that statement, yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That was a lot. Okay, I have multiple questions as well. As I'm reading all of these requests, we have amendment requests for the height increase, a small scale plat variance, a buffer reduction, setback waivers, and a prior sidewalk variance. And I'm asking for what is offered as the enhancement to justify all of these changes, and every single one of these is the 125% landscaping enhancement. So we're being asked to increase from 100 to 150, but they'll give us landscaping. They're asking us to change and have small scale plot variances, and they're going to give us the same landscaping as a reason. They're going to ask for the buffer reduction, and they're offering the landscaping as meeting those qualifications. So I'm wondering if the planning regulatory alignment, if they line, landscaping's not a height overlay criteria as far as I know, is it?
Go ahead, Cole.
If I may, on the height overlay district, we are already entitled to 150 feet on this site. We are not asking for an increase. If you read the Fourth Amendment to the development agreement, it specifically states all other parcels shall have a height limitation of 100 feet or the maximum height allowed under section 29-162 of the code, which is 150 feet, provided that they put in the mixed use development requirements. And this is trying to clarify, the purpose of this request is trying to clarify that there's an interpretation issue on what qualifies as mixed use development. The staff is taking the position that you have to have two uses within one building. Our position is a mixed use development has more than one uses within the development that is being done. So that's the clarification. The 150-foot height, we're not asking for an increase in height. That's already there. This property was put into the height overlay district by the city, not at the request of the developer. And the code, the amendment has already been done, and it's section 3.4 of the existing Fourth Amendment. That language is there. So just clarifying, we're not asking for a height increase at this point. We're asking for a clarification that we already meet mixed use determination.
I appreciate it. Let's stay within procedure, though. If the members are okay with opening the public hearing from the applicant, then let's do that. But if you want to ask your questions of staff before public hearing, we can do that.
I would like that to continue with staff,
I was
if
just
that's
trying
okay.
to clarify
I
that
appreciate
language.
it, but
Thank you, thank you. So I'm asking if you could clarify how landscaping enhancements referenced in the amendment relates to those qualifying criteria for that.
So
He just
landscaping-
mentioned that he can go to the 150 foot, but there are criteria that must be met in order to.
Correct. I mean, in essence, landscaping is a form of buffering. However, these were the incentives that were offered by the applicant. So staff has evaluated what they have offered, and this is where we're at with the agreement. So staff feels that we need more information in order to come to a determination.
And and then on the stormwater component of the small-scale variance, since the development has already gone through several amendments, what are the new factors leading to the request of reducing or changing those?
I'm sorry,
We're changing based on lot level stormwater independence. So we went from a single own positive outfall, and now we're asking to incorporate several instead of them being single. What has changed that,
I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question.
okay. So under the independent system that we have now that is plotted, so each lot functions autonomously. They have its own legal positive outfall. And they're asking now to change that to share them. So the lots may become hydraulically interdependent. So they went from being independent to being,
Potentially, but we don't have the information at this time to make that determination.
okay.
And that is one of staff's concerns. I just want to clarify regarding the height. So the change is to clarify that the mixed-use development qualifications, but also to meet the criteria for providing the walkway adjacent to the Indian River Lagoon, and other requirements that, the criteria to receive that height incentive.
And, yeah. I'm gonna let
Is
you
that
finish.
for,
Let's wait.
so what you're
Wanna
saying
ask
is the
them.
properties just along the lagoon are subject to qualify for the height increase?
That's
And not
correct.
the ones back behind? So what we're asking for in these are not on the lagoon and they are back and they do not qualify?
Correct.
So therefore they would not be
And we
qualified
at this
to
time do not have
150.
the information of where those buildings would be located.
Okay, all right. I have a question about the variance, the 25-foot variance on Highway 1, the 50-foot setback to the variances and waivers there. And I guess you did, I'm wondering, the setbacks there, they protect the home from the roadway. So we're being asked to allow them to go 25 feet closer to the road in order to put a fence or perhaps a pool or something of that nature?
Yes,
Is
it pertains to
what I read.
accessory structures. Fences are permitted within that building setback by right. However, if they were going to put any kind of shed, pool, things like that in their backyard, they would be severely limited.
So is that more a limit to the lot and the design? Because it's a four-way highway. They're going 55 miles an hour, and I'm assuming the setback is there for a very specific purpose, and we're being asked to grant a variance, so somebody, because of the way that they developed and laid out the property, now they need a variance and the ability to now move into that setback, which is there for a reason. So it's been plotted, but it's not been built. Is there not a reason why this is not new? That 50-foot setback was there to begin with. The road's not changed. They developed it knowing that there is a 50-foot barrier there. So even though it is, I think 11 or so that we're asked to give them permission to do, I find that hard to do when it is there for a purpose and it was known prior to the development, and now we're being asked to give them a pass on it.
I would agree with that statement.
Okay. Sorry. Keep going, guys.
I have a
Member Gurr.
follow-up question. I'm glad you asked the ones you did. I also agree with your observation. So the applicant mentioned that there is a difference of opinion, what is mixed use? So when you use new urbanism and you do mixed use, admittedly, there are two ways to do mixed use. One is more Euclidean zoning, where you have red commercial and yellow residential over here, but you have them in a neighborhood. Or you have a convenience store in the neighborhood, the red commercial, and you have all those residential houses, and it's mixed use because it's walkable, it provides goods and services in a convenient way, it provides it without using automobile trips. The applicant mentioned that if we don't do something, there's going to be all these truck trips tearing the highways up because they're hauling dirt rather than keeping it on site. Same idea. For mixed use, you do that to reduce trips, not pile sand up, though. The idea of mixed use in an urban environment, as this project appears to be, would be at least fairly reasonably arguable that it should be buildings with internal commercial, because they're multiple family, 150-foot tall skyscrapers, as it must be best analyzed. And that type of mixed use is equally mixed use. And I don't think it's a lack of clarification as much as a lack of design. If you just want tall buildings and you have mixed uses, commercial on the first floor of the buildings around 7th Avenue comes to mind, that's mixed use. It's not Euclidean in the sense it's just residential or just commercial. But to say now in the Fifth Amendment that we've just kind of come aware that we can't do 150-foot buildings limited to residential only use, we'll put a convenience store down the street mixed use, doesn't seem to be in keeping with the type of development, the caliber of which this is, and the caliber meaning that you've got warrants for buildings that are far in excess of what Titusville skyline would typically see or has seen in the past. So I'm a little bit, in my own opinion, agreeing with staff. It's not the clarification. I think the intention was mixed use in buildings that are excessively tall and integrating commercial into it. And I think that's where staff comes from in your analysis.
Right, so section 29-162 regarding that maximum building height within the height overlay. So the mixed use development is defined as includes buildings with a minimum of 2 uses, such as multifamily and commercial, or hotel and commercial. And then commercial uses shall serve the general public, and then it provides a list of examples.
So I take it that you disagree with the comment made earlier that mixed use is not just a building with 2 uses. It could be 2 uses within a pattern book of a lot of subdivisions, neighborhoods, like the example of a commercial convenience store in a neighborhood. Mixed use.
Yes, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes. You don't agree with his comment that it would be arguable. It isn't arguable. It is the case the buildings have to have uses, different uses in the same building, as a tall skyscraper might.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Is there any definition as to how much the split is? I mean, does a 400 square foot coffee shop and everything else is residential make it mixed use, or do we have any clarity on that?
I believe the code remains mute on a percentage for qualification to meet a mixed use development.
Okay. Any other questions before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, please state your name, Cole, for the record, and I'll open the public
For the
hearing.
audience here, Cole Oliver for the applicant here. First, as a, real quick touch to your question, section 37-1 of your code specifically defines mixed use, and I'll read it to you. It says the development of a tract of land or building or structure with 2 or more different uses. So it uses the word or. It specifically addresses tracts of land and buildings. Those are considered mixed use. The question on specific amounts of percentage of the building, it doesn't. And the 29-162, it says mixed use developments may increase height to 150 feet, provided the development meets the criteria below. And then it lists 2 criteria, which includes buildings with a minimum of 2 uses. But, we're interpreting it as within the development, not within the single building, because that complies with the definition of mixed use in the definition sections of your code. And then they have the public walkway that has to be provided with certain amenities. And again, we are in the overlay district. We're agreeing to meet those requirements of the public walkway and amenities that are required there. We're just trying to clarify that this is a mixed-use development per code as the definition, because we have a definitional interpretation issue with staff. We don't agree with them on it having to be all within one building. So, you know, I reiterate the comments I made out of order earlier, and apologies for that. You know, just kind of been with this one for a long time, and I'm not, you know, she may not have as much history with it as we do, but I did want to point out at that time that this 150-foot is already in the development agreement. And so we're not asking to increase any landscaping or change any of the landscaping requirements to meet that, you know, your point on that requested variance issue. The other of the issues that we're seeking tonight is, as again, the height, the clarification there. The next one is, I got the wrong page here. The next one would be the small scale plat amendment process. What we're really requesting there is to comply with your process, with the exception of, right now, you can't bring it in by mains, and we want to be able to utilize private mains to connect if it's necessary at the time we go through the process. And we believe that is in concert with the intent as is set forth in the small scale site plan process, which is an administrative process. We do bring every plan in to the staff to review for code compliance on everything else. Where the variance request comes in is that we want to be able to utilize private mains in that process, so there's no extension of the public facility improvements, which is the next sentence in the intent section. Is the process provides the division of a limited number of lots with minimum need for public facility improvements and access provided by the existing public streets or right-of-ways. So all of those public improvements and facilities will be in place at the time that we would come in with this process. So the three main areas where we'd be looking to utilize is being able to use private mains, so the developer has to maintain those throughout, you know, the process of the life of this development. The second is to allow for joint stormwater improvements within those lots as we come through. And that's already allowed in your process, that if there is a existing stormwater management facility can be provided by independent or any other created on an existing lot. We have to show we have legal outfall, which we have to do for the St. John's anyway. If the proposed lots to be created previously approved development with a stormwater management system in compliance, this requirement may be waived. So we will have a stormwater system in compliance with the St. John's regulations and your all's regulations when we come in for that application through the staff process of the lot split. And the final is we want to be able to utilize private driveways and cross-access easements instead of tying into the public roads at every spot where it would be split. So it would give people the option to cut down on the number of points of intersections onto the main spine road that runs there and allows the interconnectivity through the sites. As it stands now, that small scale plat could disrupt it by forcing every single piece to go out onto the main road, turn around and go, 20 feet and take the next driveway into the next lot. We're trying to avoid that and build a community that is unified and keeps those roads off or those vehicle trips off of the streets and internal to the sites. And within that, we've requested that we would utilize the same significant enhancement of the 125% minimum required by the land development regulations. That's a standard. I know in the staff report this time, they say we don't know how to utilize that. That's a standard that's been used in the other iterations of this development agreement through the different processes. I'd direct you to the Fourth Amendment again, and that is the one that is contained in the various waivers and development section 3.6.8.1 sub A, where it says the developer will enhance the landscape buffer around the sidewalks for that particular one by increasing the number and size of plants materials equal to 125% above the minimum required by the land development regulations. So we mirrored that language again here for those areas where we were asking for the variance and the setbacks. And the the setbacks that we're talking about within that, and that I think bleeds into the next one, is when we have the two parcels within a larger parcel that's proposed to be subdivided. So for instance, if we have an apartment complex that's going to go next to a commercial shopping center or a grocery store, we want to have the walking paths and not be forced to put in double landscape barriers of 20 feet. We'd like the option, if it works for the flow of both the people that would be purchasing these properties, to do it 10 foot, but enhance the landscaping between them. So that's what we're asking for there. We're not trying to get away from it. We're just trying to utilize the space in a little smarter manner. And that was the landscape buffer yards section. We already touched on the 50-foot setback from the US 1 for the residential lots in that subsection. And we already have the enhanced 25% buffer that we're putting in along US 1 to accommodate for the noise. And what we're asking for is for those lots to be able to utilize their backyards to put, pool screen enclosures or swimming pools or the other accessory uses. So we specifically limited it, or proposed to limit it as to what would need to be, what we're requesting to be allowed to go within that 25-foot setback. Those lots already extend into there. It's just trying to give those potential homeowners the flexibility to do that in the development agreement now. They can always come in and ask you guys independently later. That's their right if they buy these lots. But we were just trying to do it up front now. The final section is what we call the phase clearing and stormwater drainage improvement. And again, that's the different interpretation with how the code is processed. The staff has taken the position that these can't be processed unless you have a full site plan approval. What we want to try to do is utilize the development orders or permits, which is how the tech manual defines a permit, is a development order and permit. It's defined as the same in the first page of our technical manual for the city, is to go in and receive the permits, which the city can get for the clearing and grading of limited areas or the stormwater improvements, which are under Site 1 class, or Class A, I forget the terminology, apologies, but I think they're Class 1 permits. And that's a lower standard of not having to map out everything that's going to go in there, because there are no utilities going in here at this point. This is simply moving the dirt within the process to try to, one, obviate the need to haul the dirt off and then haul it back in, which with the resulting traffic and dump trucks that would be running everywhere around, but also to develop the site in a uniform manner, piecemeal as it comes along. So we will be meeting our applications and the permits with the St. John's. Those would be reviewed by you all as well at the time that those are applied for. This is simply setting up the process so that as they dig the master stormwater ponds, they can stage that fill around the site for future site plans that come in and go through the full site plan approval process with the staff in the city. And, we're not seeking commercial mining. This is not being sold. This is not being exported. We are not doing it indefinitely. There's a provision within the agreement whereby it's limited to 2 years. And if they haven't come in with new site plans to put that fill where it needs to go to balance the sites, they would apply to the city for an extension, or they have to put it back and remove it and return it back to its state that it was in at the time they put that dirt there. And, we expect that if we can do this, we'll be able to move these along faster, and they're not going to be there long. But, we want to provide the city with a mechanism that if for some reason we can't do it timely, you guys have the opportunity to force our hand. The developer has stated that they're willing to put up a bond for that, and that bond would cover, like any other bond that we put up, the amount determined by the engineers necessary to return the property to the state it was in there. We've agreed to meet your tree mitigation and tree preservation for any lands that would be cleared. Those clearings would be brought into plan at that time, and the staff can review and comment on them. So all of this would still be coming in to staff for review and approval. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability. Apologies, there's been a lot of coffee today, and sometimes I speak quickly when I get nervous. So,
Member Face.
Wow. There's a lot. There's a lot going So I do want to address your very first concern of the definitions. And I believe that when you spoke earlier, you spoke of the mixed-use definition in one category, whereas this applies to the overlay. And I believe there's a different definition that applies for the overlay. Would you agree?
I haven't seen it if so.
Okay, so and that's what I want to ask staff. So are there two definitions for mixed use? One that he's stating, and then one that governs the overlay?
Yes, so the definition that I read previously was directly from the height overlay section, and as to where the definition that the applicant has read was from the main definition section of our entire code.
And so on that one, I would state that where she's saying includes the buildings with these different uses, that's the criteria that it meets, but not, that doesn't define a mixed-use development. And what we're saying is that we will meet the criteria. There will be more than two buildings of two different uses on this development, and there will be the walkway provided along the public walkway and associated amenities that are the second criteria within the format here.
So how familiar are you with, so if you're not familiar with the definition that she's quoting that governs the overlay section, because it has specific language that says the building should have two uses. And that was what the definition that she quoted that governs the overlay section.
Yes, and I'm reading it here. What was in the staff report was not taken directly from your report here.
Okay.
Or from your criteria. It specifically says includes buildings with a minimum of two uses, not include a building with two uses. So that's the distinction we're making.
And I believe that that's where we're in conflict.
And when we go look at the general definitions that cover mixed use, it does say a tract of land with more than two uses. So it's it's an interesting pickle there.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna ponder that one, because in the world of legal jargon, and I'm sure you've done this quite a bit, right? It begins to drill down. And as it drills down, the one up above no longer applies, the one that drills down does. And so you're asking us to not take the one that we drill down to, but apply the one up above. And so, I'll give you an example, okay? So government documentation or government books, right? So the government will put out a regulation. Okay, and that regulation will go out. And let's say that the Department of Defense wants to add an amendment or change it. Well, which one now applies? Does the federal regulation apply? Excuse me, does the overarching one apply? Or does the one that the Army itself applies? DFARS. Well, DFARS will trump the FAR. Okay? And so, and I do apologize, I have a background in government contracting, which is why I use that example. And so that's what we've done here. So you've quoted the general application, which is correct, which would apply every place else except for here inside the overlay area. And now we have to make sure that the overlay language is clear enough that it kind of branches off from the one that you're quoting.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is these are criteria. This isn't a definition of mixed use, that they're saying, hey, your development has to meet these different things, and we're saying we do meet it. You know, it says includes buildings with a minimum two uses, such as multifamily and commercial or hotel and commercial. The development will have those two uses. And then the next is provide a public walkway and associated amenities along the length of the property's waterfront and the Indian River Lagoon shoreline. That is being done. We're saying we meet those two criteria as set forward. It's not a definition section because the definition applies to the entire development. And so I think maybe it's we're arguing, how many angels can dance on the head of a needle type thing. But, so we're just trying to clarify that we do meet these criteria. And that it does not even say in the criteria that the two uses need to be within one building. In the overlay district, it does not say that. And I can hand you the highlighted language if, you want to review it while we're up here, but.
It's provided on page 32 of your packets, that code section.
Okay. Again, I'll come back to that. I'm going to ponder that for just a moment. The next thing that I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, You had explained, I said, can you explain again that purpose of the two parcels together, having the buffer and joining them, explain that again? And why
Yeah.
making it 10 foot versus 20 is,
So between some of the buffers, you have type A buffer and type B buffers, and they're different widths. What we want to try to be able to do is utilize the more narrow one between the uses that would be, I think we're looking really at multifamily and commercial. And instead of doing that 20-foot, we want to double the density or increase the density to 125%, whatever it is, with either more mature trees or greater number of trees. That's why we utilize the language that we worked with the staff in the past on the 125%. So meaning because the math is easier, if you had acquired a 10-inch tree, we'd put a 12.5-inch tree, so you gain a couple of years worth of maturity. Or if the code required 10 plants, well, that's a bad example. If the code required 100 plants, we put 125 plants, because I don't want to put half a plant in there if we use the number of 10. So that was what we're trying to do, is get some more mature density between these projects as they come in.
okay, all right. And thank you for that one. And I think I'm gonna relinquish my time here. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot.
It's a big development.
Because the last one deals with that moving of dirt for an area that you're not going to be doing any construction on for any period of time. And again, I appreciate the bond. I really do appreciate the bond. In the event that it doesn't move, the bond can then kick in and we can remove it back, right? But then there's this luxury area that's beautiful, right? With a big pile of dirt sitting there.
Yeah, and we can work with staff with where those are placed, but we would leave the matured vegetation around those piles along the roads.
Okay.
Member Seidler.
Thank you. I just want to piggyback off what was just said, and when he was asking about the reduction of a 20-foot to a 10-foot buffer, and the reason for it is because you want to put in mature trees. Why don't you just put in mature trees in a 20-foot buffer?
It eats into the land for the development is one of the reasons. And again, this is the market is telling them that they don't want these hard breaks creating these total separations. They want to have some of that visual ability to do it. And what we want is the flexibility of if the customers say that's what they want between them and these other districts to provide that. I'm not saying we're going to have to do it, but we'd like the option to provide that if that's what the customers want.
Okay, and then I'm going to also follow up. You mentioned and you brought up the Fourth Amendment and how you also offered the landscape enhancement as a reason to accept whatever those amendments were. And I'm just wondering, every single one of these requests that you've asked for, and one is infrastructure, there's the buffers, they're replacing setbacks, you're offering to this 125% landscape enhancement. How many times can we enhance this same 125% landscape buffer along Spine Road? Or it just seems like landscape enhancement versus infrastructure changing, those to me don't seem to be equal.
Is that a
So
question
I'm
or,
wondering, is there anything else because it's supposed to be for the benefit of the public?
I would guess the question is were the things that were enhanced in Amendment 4 the same
No, so
sex?
they're different
Okay.
areas that are receiving
So
the
it's
enhanced
the
landscape.
same criteria, but different
Yes, sir.
areas.
And that's been driven mostly by conversations with staff and council throughout this iterative process. That's when speaking with them, what we've been
Oh, and is that
driven
what
to.
we're missing here? You have not submitted a plan or drawings to show us what staff is saying is all missing here?
This is the first we've heard of that staff wanted on the landscaping plans. In the past, if we've done this, they've wanted the language, so it's okay. But that one was, a surprise to us coming into tonight. And, we would propose, depending on, how you guys vote tonight for or deny it, we can ask the city council if that's what they want, and we can work to try to bring some illustrative drawings on that. But what's happened in the prior versions of this is when a drawing gets attached and then something changes, whether it's market demands or not, then they have to come back in for a full-blown development agreement change, as opposed to utilizing the language that's in there. So if that drawing shows something and it moves, we have to come back in for a new development agreement. Or if the types of plants used in that drawing change, it's come back in for a new development agreement. So we're trying to provide staff with some flexibility with these goals, and the developer with some flexibility in knowing what they have to meet to get the staff's approval in that process.
Okay, and my next one is stockpiling. Do you have any piles currently out there? And by the sales office, in the development currently?
That property by the sales office is owned by somebody else, not us.
Not on their property, it's owned by another.
Out there that has been there for many years. It's a big pile of rubble, but that's not owned by us, never was.
That's not owned by you. And so these stockpiles that you're referring to, and they're quite significant, you have a 2-year, you anticipate them being there for 2 years?
We hope not. If this process where we can come in with the small plat administrative process, it speeds it up and we can get the land planned and ready for the third-party users who will be going vertical. And at that point, those stockpiles will be graded into the property in the appropriate manner where they need to be based upon where those new retention ponds would go. So this is temporarily keeping it there as the retention is being put in a phased project. Very similar to what Vieira did as they were going through their process. And I know they have slightly different codes, but it's the same process.
Okay, and this might be to staff and yourself, but this request for the small-scale plat variance, does this qualify for a small-scale plot?
We wouldn't have enough information at this time to make that determination, and I believe that that's part of staff's concerns.
And what we're saying is when they bring it in, if staff says this does not meet our qualifications for it, okay, we understand that. We're just asking that when they bring that plan to you, we're allowed to utilize private mains and be within that process, meaning we can't divide it too many times. We can't do any of the other stuff that could happen with, the dangers of not going through a full-blown plat process. Again, to reiterate, that is the ability to utilize private mains, the ability to utilize the joint stormwater retentions on those parcels, provided they have the stormwater permitting, from the applicable authorities, and the right to have cross-access into their neighboring parcels as opposed to going out onto the public right-of-ways.
Thank you.
But otherwise, yes, ma'am, we would meet if we don't meet the criteria of the small scale plat amendment, staff will say we don't meet it, and either we come before you guys on the full plat review, or they don't get to do the project.
Member Garrard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the applicant's representative, when you speak about these private mains, you're talking about force mains, the majority of the principal infrastructure for water and sewer service to the site.
I'd have to get the engineer to speak on that part. That's a little above my pay grade, but
I
yes,
probably
sir.
have a question for him, so is he here? Perfect.
Reluctantly maybe, but yes, Rodney's here.
Reluctance is good. It's like interpretation. So the answer to the question is?
Told you I wouldn't be able to speak eloquently.
Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue here in Titusville.
Good evening.
Good evening. So I was going to talk about that a little bit. The next to the last page in this agenda packet is a page from the Development Agreement Amendment that shows the development. If you look there, and you see the spine roads and the main roads. So the only road that's not complete, and it's under review now, is the spine road between the two traffic circles. And so once they're complete, there will be water and sewer, no lift stations required because there will be locations already provided for any lift station on the Spine Road in a platted area. So any of these areas will not require sewer lift stations. And if you look at it, you have to look at it to see it, but the reason I'll go over my presentation.
It's on page 76 of your
There
packets.
won't be any lift stations required.
That answers part of the question. The next question that I would have regarding the idea that the infrastructure, then not the lift stations as a component of the infrastructure, but the mains, big pipes, correct?
8-inch.
Big pipes. So if this is a public system, the construction requirements for you to develop the public infrastructure requires, I'm thinking, a bonding effect for that infrastructure, which means that you buy the 8-inch pipe and you place it in the ground at cost. Then you go get a bond to assure that the 8-inch pipe's going to work in a long-term duration, and then somewhere at the end of that duration, you're going to return the money from the bond because it's been deemed acceptable. Is that my understanding correct?
That's if it's public.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. Yeah, you do a bill of sale and a maintenance agreement. Yeah.
If it's private, then it's the cost out of the developer to put the infrastructure in, maintain the infrastructure, replace the infrastructure, but there's no bond to assure the developer will do that, short of he says, they say, we trust it will work. Is that a fair difference between private mains and public mains, one bonded for assuring and one not?
For instances, on one of these parcels, there's an apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
And so they extend the sewer to serve that. That's always private.
To the apartment complex internal,
Yes.
like private streets.
Right, and it'll be exactly like that.
So your exception to have these private mains would be just like the private parking lot analogy to an apartment complex, or apartment complexes, private water lines under the private parking lot serving the residents of the apartment. The
Right.
main that's at the road where the connection is a public main.
The connection in the street is public, the public street, and then the site, it's private.
And so
privately
in
maintained.
short, a failure of the water system in an apartment complex is all the apartment dwellers have a problem, and the apartment management has to fix it, and sometimes that doesn't quite go as smoothly as it should. And that was where my question came from, is whether your application of private mains was going to have an impact to the extent that folks would be left without any responsibility or accountability short of lawsuits between parties. They wouldn't be able to go and say, city, you have to fix this because it's yours, it was dedicated to the public. And I understand the private nature of designing an apartment complex. Is that private main going to only be limited to that scenario, or will it also apply to detached single-family homes?
Detached single-family homes
part of the small
are not part of the small plat, but they're all public. There's no private mains in any of the single-family. They're all public.
And
An
this-
apartment complex, the way that is handled is if there's no sewer and no water, then there won't be any renters either. And so,
Well, that's
So
not
that will
always
take care of
true,
the
I'm afraid
situation.
to say, but yeah, there are people like
and so, I mean, I don't know of anything unless they're very, very old around that's a problem.
Yeah, I won't be there when that happens. I hope not either, but it could happen. I have a question. I'm not sure who the applicant's representative is going to answer about the piles of dirt. The principle I have understanding your presentation is you want to be able to go into a larger swath of area, clear it in preparation, work out the plans for the preparation, excavate rudimentary areas for future retention that would be a recessed area, and the stockpile removed, piled over on the side, and lays there for a while to be used, spread out for elevating building footprints, building pads, road infrastructure.
So the engineer can probably correct me when I say it wrong, but the excavation that would be done in accordance with the St. John's permit for the stormwater that's being put in. So the excavation would be to permit, and that's the final. That's not roughed in, that's done for that portion of the overall stormwater system.
Correct.
And then as that fill comes out, we want to stage it around the site so that as those plans finalize, those areas can be moved without having to move the fills on and off the public streets multiple times.
As opposed to, for example, a master grading plan whereby you take on the improvements, the excavation, the backfill, the elevation changes, and the use of the dirt in a more expeditious manner that reduces this concern that I think you mentioned in your presentation, that would be guaranteed because you're going to bond it, and if the dirt started blowing and the developer went south, so to speak, that someone would be able to come in there and recover that problem solution by removing the dirt.
But that would also require the clear cutting and mass grading of the entire site and not allowing the existing mature vegetation to stay there, which we might be able to save in the future site plans once somebody who's developing a certain parcel knows exactly where their footprint's going.
So in the 300-acre site thereabout you have, and a master plan is submitted and approved by St. John's, at this time you have a master plan approved for all stormwater infrastructure design or not?
No, that's in submittal though, right? Yeah, that's being reviewed now.
Okay,
And
but
the-
you
and
don't
the
have one
areas-
now,
And
right.
the areas that are low that will need fill when this developed will be the stockpile areas.
Well, where I was going, kind of like Mr. Faison mentioned about start at the top and at the bottom's another statement, another question, another rule. So if you choose not to do the improvements warranted by the master grading plan, which has been submitted to become approved by St. John's, in typical development, thinking of 8 pieces of the pie is 8 inches, and you know exactly the dimensions of the pie and the pan and the crust. You just choose to cut one piece out and get it ready to eat or sell. And then you move to the next piece of pie. What you're proposing to do is to take the excavated material, put it somewhere else for storage so you don't have to move the trips and trucks on the road. During the time that's going to mature and be used is frankly indefinite. There's no guarantee. You mentioned that too by saying, but if something went wrong, we'd bond it and the city could come in
No,
and
we have
take
a
care of it.
2-year time limit in the agreement that's before you.
2 years to pile this up, leave it there for 2 years, and then move it.
To utilize it,
Okay, so 2 years, the pile of sand is sitting there waiting to be used.
and then spread.
Right, but an extension, that's a good point. Like a variance, you just assume you have to get an extension if you need more time. The reason I'm concerned is I and other people have experienced this, I am sure. I'm witness to the improvements to the Titusville High School's baseball field. And they're moving a lot of dirt around probably 40 acres of property. They've done an excellent job in both construction management. They've done an excellent job with screening. But a 6-foot-high opaque screen doesn't really impede the blowing dirt. So for at least the past month and a half during these windy season winds, it's pretty interesting just how much dirt accumulates on everything I own, my house, my car, me, if I stand out there for a few minutes. And the point being, with a large pile of dirt unmaintained, there's nothing being provided, you're not sprinkling it, you don't have any schedule by which you would reduce that potential blowing of sand, except 2 years, that everybody lives with that for 2 years.
Which is one of the reasons we were proposing leaving the mature vegetation around it. And
I
not
can see
doing
where
the
that could
full-blown,
mitigate it, sure, that's good. Thank you for your answers.
Member Faison.
Clear cutting. So in addition to piling the dirt up in low-lying areas with mature vegetation around it, I'm kind of confused about the clear cutting and mature vegetation to surround the piles of dirt. How do they coincide? How do they coexist?
Yeah, so we're not proposing a clear cut. We were going to maximize it at 30%. Hopefully it will be less, but we wanted to provide a clear rationale that we're not clear cutting the site. Clear cutting is 100% clearing of the site. That's how it's defined. We're proposing to keep it below 30. 30 would be the max we would come to staff with the plan for approval for, so.
So that 30% that we're talking about that you would max, right? So at some point in time, I remember in a previous meeting, I believe 30% site utilage was what was said before. Was that the rest of it would remain wooded anyway, right? So of the overall site, right, how much of the percentage would be used for building, percent-wise?
I'm not sure the answer. I know there's an open space requirement within the RMU district upon build out, and the developer will meet those RMU standards as they built the process out.
I guess what my question is, right, is are we using numbers that kind of hide our true intent? Meaning, is that if we're going to use 30% of the overall property, for example, right, and leave 70% vegetation anyway, when we ask for 30% clearing, we're only asking to clear what we're only going to use anyway. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, and part of it's my hearing, so apologies.
That's okay. I may be speaking kind of fast. So I'll say it this way. I remember previously, and I could be wrong, that someone had briefed us and saying that we're not going to destroy all the vegetation on this site. We're only going to build on 30% of the overall acreage available.
I'm not sure that was ever stated. I know there's large conservation areas that are being maintained. Those typically kind of coincide with the wetlands and some of the riverine structures that run through it. There, in the, I think the '08 agreement, there was a scrub jay mitigation parcel that had been set aside. That there are no scrub jays there, so the purpose of that was no longer there. That was amended by the city in, I think, 2021 or maybe 2022, but they're still meeting the overall open space requirements that are set in the code. And I don't think there's ever been a statement that only 30% of the site would be developed. I don't recall that at all, and apologies if I'm wrong.
Okay, so I guess at the end of the day, right, what I'm trying to see is if that 30% that we're going to cut is the 30% that we're only going to use anyway, which would then be a workaround to still clear cutting. You know what I mean? So we're just using language to get around clear cutting, not saying we're clear cutting, but we're clear cutting.
So no, I think that where we're going to try to locate these piles are where the buildings are going to naturally be located as the development goes on. So that's going to be cleared eventually anyway. And so what we wanted to do is position this dirt in those areas so that it's cleared, the dirt stored there. As the final plan comes in, then it's spread around the site as needed. So, you know, we don't view it as clear cutting at all. It's just the stages of the development as it's going through.
Okay. Okay. And then my only last question is that, as Member Grott here has made clear, there's no agreement currently in place. And so I don't know, and maybe it's just me that has the question, is why hasn't there been agreement made thus far? And why has this come before us to make these decisions when there's still some work that needs to be done between you and staff?
We've worked with staff to the extent we can. I think this is a distillation of that work, and we're bringing it to the policy and decision makers of the city to kind of call balls and strikes as we go through the process. You know, we didn't, that's the 125% language and the staff's comment that they don't know how to work with that. We're happy to work with them as we move through the process to try to amend that language, and we're happy to, you know, work through that with them as we go through the city council process on the readings. But I think it was Friday, the agenda came out. That's the first time that we've heard that, hey, we don't know how to apply this standard, but it's the standard that's already in the development agreement. So to the question on that, we can work with them on that, but we thought it was pretty straightforward. Again, 10 inches, we'll do 12.5 inches. You know, 100 plants, we'll do 125 plants. You know, the other side of it, again, I think, I'm not gonna say we've exhausted our ability, but real close. Everybody's very tired.
Got it. Okay. Well, we appreciate you, okay?
Thank you. And if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to stumble about and try to answer them to the best of my abilities.
One more so far, Member Steedler.
Thank you. And I know this is not part of your submittal, but on page 31, where you do have the drawings of the phases, and you have, I'm looking at a cleared area along the water there, where you have, in this particular photo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 homes built. Did this same 30% criteria of clearing fall within this phase? I see there are trees over to the right. How does this relate to how you're going to be clearing the next lots?
I'm trying to get to the agenda packet and which page. Could you repeat the page?
It's going to be page 31.
everyone. And which pile are you looking at? Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
am looking at, as you're asking to clear and the 30% of clear cutting or whatever have you, did that same criteria apply to this area where there aren't any trees and there are the roads and the 11 houses? And my question is, does that little grouping of trees to the right
So,
qualify for that?
so the clear areas where you see the houses, those are the already platted single-family subdivisions that have been under construction. So those were cleared and put in. The 30% criteria is what we're trying to get at is where the piles are currently showing proposed on this site is where we got to that number. That's where we think the staging of them, which puts them as far away from the roads and the single-family houses as we can get them without taking them off the property, and close enough to where, they're not gonna have to be blowing around a whole bunch again, moving them other spots.
So I guess what I'm asking are there tree preservation criteria that were applied to this grouping?
The grouping where the housing is?
Mm-hmm.
That, I don't believe so.
So I think I understand, and please correct me.
Please help
is,
me.
is the only place they're asking for clear cutting. So the areas you're referring to are tracks that have gone through the plat process, and whatever clearing was done was addressed in that area. I think what this section, the 30% we're talking about, is they've got to clear some spots to put the dirt. And that's all they're talking about is that they're going to apply that 30% for areas that are not yet platted, final platted, that would have a tree cutting area or a whole clearing plan. They are, in advance of it, need to clear some spots to put the dirt, and that's what this discussion is happening about. It's not the areas that they're getting ready to build out a project on. They're finding a spot that they're not going to touch for this 2 years so they can put dirt there.
We hope it's a lot less than 2 years.
I
We think
get
it
that,
will be.
but
yes.
I think there was a lot of confusion about the entire project versus unplatted areas.
And on this page, you can see the blue lines that are in there, and I don't know if you have the color up there on it or not, but that is where these proposed ponds would be being dug, and that's the master retention, a portion of the master retention system that will service the whole property under the St. John's stormwater permits. And now there will be some other smaller ponds that are interconnected as the individual parcels go through their needs based upon how much impervious surface each of those individual parcels will have. But they will all have the legal positive outfall and retention as required under the small-scale plat amendment process.
So again, I try, catch me if I'm interpreting it right. You're almost ready to dig stormwater ponds because that's up for approval. That dirt that comes out of those ponds, when preparing for those, rather than to take it off-site somewhere and then bring it back when you need it, you're trying to find some spots on the site to store it until you need it. Is that?
That's it, and much shorter and more eloquent than I can, so. Again, I blame the coffee.
Okay.
Gary pays me by the word.
It's, I understand printed versus descriptions. So that's that piece. And yeah, we're not used to these multi-sectioned things, and that's, I think normally we're a lot better with bite-sized chunks than a whole meal here. Yeah, so let's see. And then I think I it's just me speaking. And then I think I'm kind of where you are on the height thing. I do agree that as it relates to the 50-foot setback, So there's certainly a concern, and I have the same concern, that that 50-foot setback along US 1 was for a safety issue. That you put a swimming pool full of kids and a car goes through that buffer, you've got a safety issue. Is there any safety restraint, concrete fence, anything along there that we're not aware of that would eliminate or at least mitigate that safety concern, or is that a real concern?
I mean, I would never say that concern on safety is not a real concern. It's always a valid concern. What I would say is, if the increased landscaping and density serves as a better catching net for any cars that would be coming through in the event that, someone is, not being facetious, but mature landscaping does, stop vehicles, as we probably all have unfortunately witnessed throughout. And there is going to be a wall at the, along the US 1 portion.
Behind the 12 lots that we're talking about? So there will be, and what's that wall? Is that like a?
Obviously, we can't unilaterally decide that, but that's what we're going to, that's what we want to do, is for a wall.
Okay, so if we put a condition in there that the wall's constructed before something could be put in that 25-foot setback, that might be a compromise. Member Childs.
Yeah, I'm a programmer, so I like to go through everything, systematically. So, the multi, or let me get back to it here. So the mixed use, I always want to call it multi-use for some stupid reason. For one, it's called the mixed use development agreement, and so it's a mixed use. But I think that's what's kind of confusing. But I think every time, I've been on the commission for 5 years, and I think every time we've ever talked about a mixed-use development, it's been a single, I guess, a single lot or something we've been talking about, especially for Live Local. We've talked about that, and that, there's certain requirements for that for mixed use, and it's always been about one lot or whatever. So I kind of agree with staff on their interpretation of that, at least because that's how I've always heard it, described to us. But I also would go think we haven't really talked about it in a big development like this either. So, but I'm always apt to kind of side on that with staff as far as their interpretation of that and what it shows in the overlay.
And to
Sorry.
that, I
Yeah,
would
go
just
ahead.
state that your different mixed-use codes don't require mixtures within one building. They anticipate and state that you can have two different uses within the same property. And that's the downtown
Yeah,
mixed
on the
use,
same
the
property,
urban
yeah.
mixed use, all urban village, they all allow for different uses within different buildings.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah. I get that. And I think that's where I think it's confusing for a lot of us too, is that we use, you have mixed use zones and stuff and areas. And then, but when we're talking about this specifically though, we're talking, I think it, applying to at least a single building, it seems to make the most sense. At least that's how I've always heard it referred to, but, I don't know. Anyway, well, that's A, and other people can weigh in on it again, but, B, as far as what sorry, because A was the, mixed use, and then B is the plating process, and for utilities. So the staff's comments are, that it has to be provided, the utilities have to be provided, and the stormwater management facility can be provided independently. And so I guess just summarize your argument again for this one for me.
Yeah, and so if you go through the second page as it's talking about this item, you get the staff's comments, and it's utilities, water, sewer. It's the code, says that no mains can be extended, and that makes sense if it's a public main. Because you don't necessarily want to have public mains having to be extended here and then, essentially breaking off parcels of land that may not be able to be serviced by those public utilities. And I think this gets to the gentleman's point here, is the public will own the lines up to the property line. The private lines will be put in and maintained at no expense to the city for those services. And when we look at the intent of why they had the small scale plat process is to ensure that there's a minimum need for public facility improvements, and that's what the code says. And there will not be any public facility improvements; those are private facility improvements that will be done and maintained.
So what you're saying, your argument is that your proposal is really going towards the idea or the intent behind the ordinance. That's what your argument is, though, right?
We're trying to comply with the intent.
I see, yeah.
Yes, sir, and allow,
Okay.
and then in the drafting that we did was to try to be very specific as to what we're doing, and that's the private mains, the joint stormwaters between the connecting lots to comply with that. I believe it's subsection C that,
But I guess, yeah, but I just wanted to make sure that your argument is you're trying to comply with the intent of it, but they're like citing specific reasons and codes and stuff, but that's fine. I don't mind going towards the intent of something. As far, and so C, the land, I think we just discussed that one. That's a 50-foot buffer one, right? That you just talked about with doing the wall, right? That's that one, right? We just talked about, okay. D is the accessory
No,
structure.
that's actually the
yeah,
one.
D
Oh,
was
that's the
the
one.
wall
Okay.
section. Yes,
What's
sir.
the other? All right. The first C
It's
was
the 20 to 10.
C is the internal landscaping between the parcels within the project.
and your argument is because their argument, the enhancement is confusing. Developers say the proposed 125% enhancement is based on quantity, height, caliper of some combination thereof. Revise the language to specifically state what the enhancement will be in order for staff to implement it. So they're just saying they need more information about it, right? And your response is what to that?
That we've provided the calculation of the 125%, and as the site plans come in for their approval, they will meet that
All right, then they come
125%
back.
and show
That's
it what
right.
it is.
Okay, all right. It's just been so hard to keep all of this straight here.
Yeah, it's a lot of moving parts, and
And, all right, so then that was, and then, okay, so then the E was the 50-foot, E is the clearing that we were talking about, stormwater.
and the staff was correct. There was a typo. I would blame my dyslexia.
Right.
It should be section 34-214, not 24-214. So apologies.
Okay, all right, I'm caught up, thank you.
Okay, so let me, I think going through it section by section is a good thing, so I'll take a stab too. So on A, my position is, I kind of get that, kind of like Vice Chairman Childs said, is this is unique for Titusville and this board. It's bigger, and I certainly, just thinking about as a consumer, if these are, I'm assuming they're probably likely going to be condo residential buildings that are going to be very nice, very upscale like the rest of it. Is it really important to me that there's a shop in the ground floor versus it's all residential? I mean, it doesn't, I think that's a market thing. It's not necessarily something the city or we need to dictate that, oh, yeah, you really should have, a beauty shop on the first floor in a condo building versus it being entirely residential. My example before is a coffee shop. It might be a nice amenity, and the market will dictate whether the amenity needs to be there. I don't know that we need to dictate that. The platting process, I think certainly, if we can craft some language that has, which I think is the intent, that the staff still has the approval. I see this as kind of an ability to cut some red tape out and make things go quicker, which I'm all for. And then the landscape buffer, the staff does make a comment as it relates to residential. So if this was crafted that the exception was this applies to everywhere except abutting any residential property, is that acceptable, and was that the intent? Or, because I certainly can see, something between a commercial or a multifamily and residential. We don't necessarily want to reduce that buffer, but I can see between, commercial and multifamily, maybe it makes sense, or even between two commercial sections, that it makes sense.
So as to anything abutting the single family, those are already split off by the pond that's being put in and the buffer. So there's no ability to do it against the single family by design already. And we are requesting to have the option, the flexibility between multifamily and the commercial, to utilize that more dense instead of broader landscape buffering, if that's what those customers want. At the end of the day, to your point, the market may say, no, we want it broader, and that's what comes in it.
I'll let others.
And there is a staff comment about addressing the 50-foot buffers between RMU 300 and RMU 400. Those are already in place. Those are the spine roads. So there is no 300 and 400 abutting each other at this point in time.
Okay. Dee, I've already spoke to that, and then I think I also spoke to the dirt. Seems to make sense, but I do definitely want something in there that would prevent it from dragging on, as well as ideally the wind moving it when you didn't necessarily want it to be moved. So, anyone else? Member Garrod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff, the applicant presented this a few minutes ago as they're at an impasse, that they only learned about staff comments on Friday. And I'm surprised that it would be so late. I'm not condemning that, but it also equally surprising that the application process, to my knowledge, takes much longer than just a few days. Second comment is what your recommendations appear to be is to perform an improvement to the proposed agreement to clarify unclear areas, to stipulate to design standards, and to do so in harmony so that we have an agreement as opposed to the fifth disagreement agreement. And I myself believe that's the prudent thing to do here for the commission to decide things might be conditionally approved. Kind of countermands the idea of an agreement. The contract is there, we agree to it, you sign it, it's in effect. To condition the approval always leaves the dangling participle of how does that condition weave itself into a document that's presented for review all before next Tuesday or next week. I think the city council meets on this.
I believe it's the 24th.
Okay, just kind of down the road a few days. Tonight, we heard the applicant representative, someone say there was going to be a wall. Well, saying there's going to be a wall and requiring a wall is two different statements.
Which is my point, that it needs to be required.
Right, and so those types of infrastructure definitions, what's the main, where does it apply? The example given again is from the representatives, it's going to be like an apartment complex. Well, in my opinion, the agreement would say something like that. It would not apply to anything except those private mains that would be on private property. I think offering a wall for security, for safety, for sound insulation, to enhance the backyard experience of a person swimming in a pool 25 feet from US 1, to me, does kind of tend to lead itself to the development agreement aspect of it, where all those fine lines are drawn. It comes back for final approval. You have staff recommendation, we're in agreement with this, and agreement's a key word, and it moves forward to city council in a manner in which they receive a compact document that's been reviewed by staff, stipulated to by the applicant, and concurrence by the council, by the Planning and Zoning Commission as a recommendation. And so in my opinion, from all of this, I'm kind of leaning towards looking at staff's report as being the most prudent.
I think I kind of heard Mr. Oliver say that, in that they were at an impasse with staff and they wanted to hear from our opinions as well as council's opinions on what it takes to get past that impasse, which
I can agree with that. I found it interesting, your presentation, that the statement about buildings, that because you had it highlighted here, I think, mixed-use developments may increase to 150 feet provided the development meets the criteria below A, or 1, includes buildings with a minimum of 2 uses. So if that statement had said includes a building with 2 uses, we wouldn't have a disagreement. But then again, you'd only have 1 building that would have mixed use, not buildings. You're saying I can have buildings and I can put them on land, or I can put the commercial over here, I might put the residential over here only. And so in an agreement sort of way, it seems like it's even confusing to deal with the very substance of the agreement, because we're trying to read into a definition, as you put it. You read the definition this way and staff reads the definition that way, or staff believes the definition applies this way, Mr. Fason's point, and you don't believe that it does apply that way. So it's no agreement there.
I think the distinction is between definition and criteria. We believe we've met the definition of your code for mixed-use development. That's very specifically set forth. And then it says that mixed-use development shall meet certain criteria to qualify for the height enhancement. And it's the definition within that criteria, and the code is very specific on that, and it says buildings of 2 or more uses.
Yeah,
But
I understand the position that, there's a criteria to get access to the overlay requirement for the development, and that the development may contain buildings within the mixed use that aren't necessarily mixed use, but you've got access to the 150. I understand I understand the argument, and, I think that's why you're asking for a higher power to help interpret that. And I get that, because we're at an impasse. And this is, no different than the court system, that when there's disagreement, it gets kicked upstairs, and we're a step below, fully upstairs, but we're a step along the way. So, Member Faison.
It just hit me, so I'll ask this question again. So it is your stance that when it says including buildings, plural, with a minimum of 2 uses, plural, such as multifamily and commercial, your stance is those 2 buildings can be one building multifamily, the second building commercial, not multifamily and commercial?
that's my position, yes, sir.
Because
Alrighty.
it does say the development shall,
Correct.
not the building shall.
Got it. Attorney, how do you interpret this?
We're generally going to defer to staff on these unless it, comes before us.
Oh.
That's the non-answer
Volley.
answer.
Go to council. Our policy decision.
He volleyed, I got it. Okay, all right, so in my limited training of 10 years of reading documents like this, right? To me, it is clear that buildings here really, it is a building should have 2 uses. A building shall have 2 uses. I'm sorry that it says buildings here, but it says that buildings, plural, with a minimum of 2 uses, plural. So if you take out the plurality of both of those words, it's building have 2 uses. So, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
A
do,
building should have 2
but
uses.
Now we're changing the language of it.
No,
Yeah.
no, we're not changing the language. I'm just saying, to fit your narrative, right? the double plurality in this case can mean double buildings with two uses. And so you can stand on that and say, hey, this is how I read it. See what I'm saying?
But I think you said earlier, there are buildings in the development that do have two uses that effectively act as qualifiers for the development to be a multi-use development.
Got it. But the other, so now here's where the other layer comes into play, right? Is that I forgot the name of that layer again, where it says that a building has to have two uses.
But I'm not sure there's anyone shown in the code where it says a building has to have two uses.
The one that she read for the map overlay.
So it includes buildings with a minimum of two uses such as multifamily and commercial or hotel and commercial. And then I'll go ahead and just read the rest of it. Commercial uses shall serve the general public. Examples of commercial uses include, but not limited to, restaurants and/or retail uses. Commercial uses should be located with easy access to the public. The use is intended to serve. And in buildings which the lowest floor is parking, commercial uses which are provided on the second floor shall be considered to meet this requirement.
So even when you go further in that last sentence, to me is even more clarity that the buildings, right, shall have two uses. What is in the buildings in which the lower floor is parking, commercial, which is uses. So it's saying that the building has to serve, the 150-foot building must serve the general public.
But parking, so if it's condo building and you've got parking for the residents, then that's two uses?
Well, the general public, it must serve the general public. But I'm saying to that, yes.
Well,
It serves the general-
a visitor to the unit could be a general, I mean, that's the whole idea thing. I think
Yeah, I don't know.
we're sitting here, saying that it just needs clarification and somebody needs to agree. And I agree with Member Grod that, this is not for us to draft it, I think. And that's why we're spending so much time giving our opinions. Council will give their opinions, and then my guess is staff then will have direction from multiple people as to as will the applicant as to kind of where they need to meet in the middle to get past this step.
And to the member's point on the wall, if the council chooses to vote to move it forward, we're happy to do it under the condition that that wall would be included in that approval. And if the body decides to deny, recommend denial, we would obviously note and continue that agreement as we move forward to council that we would agree if the council decides to move forward that we would put that wall in.
Member Gurra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The central part of my point presenting my opinion here tonight is the word agreement. Now, stipulating to further changes, enhancements, deletions, underline, strike through before city council or subsequent to city council really defeats the purpose of writing a contract, coming to an agreement. In the case of where we're at, to me, my opinion, we're at a disagreement about definitions. We're in a disagreement about the application of a definition. We're in disagreement because it's not clear. I'm going to draw upon an experience I had. I'll leave the project nameless, but it will share with you what I believe you're at. The project proposed an avant-garde idea of multiple family development, condominiums, in which the first floor of the building was reserved for commercial use, to enhance mixed use, to create enhancements to walkability. People live up here, they go downstairs to such personal services as haircutting, to nail salons, to, in fact, it was a grocery store. And that's the way it was conceived, and that's the way it was built. But the development agreement went further in light of the comment by the applicant's representative to let the market dictate, as markets should. It's a good way of getting things done. It provided in the agreement that at the choice of the developer, notwithstanding that the units on the first floor, the buildings, the occupied spaces, were built to a more rigid commercial standard than the standard that applies to the floors above that, residential standards. Overbuilt might be a simple way of putting it, but it reserved the right at the developer's discretion to convert that to residential if the market so dictated. Well, guess what happened? The grocery store's gone 20 years later, and all the mixed uses that were there are gone because the market dictated residential occupancy. People got overbuilt, so as to speak. Commercial built buildings steal this and steal that instead of wood this and wood that, simple put. But they occupy those buildings to date based on the market, based on an agreement that clearly stated what you could do. Not an interpretation that I come back to staff one day and say, well, the way I'm interpreting the development agreement is I don't have to just have commercial here. I'm going to make it residential. And it leaves staff in a juxtaposition, always wondering, what is it they really meant to say? And that interpretive process is why a development agreement is so binding. It's a contract. It's not variable. It's black and it's white. But even tonight, we're debating the black and white of the former development agreements. To me, it seems like if anything's the lesson, it should be, let's make sure the Fifth Amendment may be the last amendment because it's clarified, it's specified, and it's in an agreement. So I again stress my point tonight has been we don't have an agreement, and that's a heck of a thing to recommend to City Council. We're recommending a disagreement because the applicant is certainly disagreeing with the staff.
So as it relates to the height, we have an agreement that we will meet your criteria. What we're saying is that we meet the mixed use development criteria. It is a mixed use development agreement to the point that was made, and it will have to have two different uses in it to be mixed use. The whole regional mixed use zoning district requires that. In the regional mixed use, we have to have a minimum of different uses to build the site out. And what we're trying to do is clarify that agreement so staff doesn't have to come in and we cite to the specific code saying we're going to meet your requirements. So we're trying to clarify that to the point that Mr. Aton made, that we're at a disagreement on this point, and the policymakers of the city were asking, that you can provide y'all's input and then it can go to council on their input and we can have this to rest, because this has been an issue that has been being kicked back and forth between the staff and the applicant for over a year, as we've discussed, this definitionary issue. So we've wrestled it a lot, and we're asking for clarity.
I'm sorry, I thought you said you had only got those comments on Friday.
We received staff's comments as it related to the 125% landscaping being something they didn't understand on Friday.
But not the allocation for mixed use being uses in a building.
No, that's what we're saying. We've been trying to wrap this into one agreement. They've consistently maintained that opinion. We've consistently held the other opinion, and we're trying to bring it into the development agreement and get clarity. Another option would be revise the ordinance, but that's.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I do have a question for staff and for council. So at the last comment made by the representative was we're trying to get to an agreement, and we've had a disagreement, briefly put. And this is a development agreement, which has got certainly exceptional standards applied to it, exceptional to standard zoning. I called it Euclidean zoning earlier, but standard zoning bill of fare. And this allows flexibility, such as mixtures of uses in buildings or a building or on tracts of land. But the question is, can this agreement codify the very standards the applicant seeks, the standards the staff may not agree with? Okay, you can have mixtures of uses, but they don't have to only be in a building, without disintegrating the comprehensive plan, which I think was staff's comment in your review, was if you do this in the mixed use overlay, we may be violating the comprehensive plans provision, not just the land development code.
I believe that was in reference to the stockpiling of fill.
Okay, but point being is, can this development agreement be a modification of all those other standards that would otherwise apply because it has been approved as an agreement? In my opinion, it needs to be black and white, line by line, letter by letter. But if staff were to concede, stipulate, and agree that your definition of mixed use is I can have independent uses limited to that use, not a collective combination required of that building, because I've exhibited a plan that perhaps shows that the walkability to the convenience store is 400 feet instead of the ground floor. So everybody says, yeah, that's a good mixed use in an urban environment. But if they stipulate to this, within the boundaries of that development agreement, can it be an exceptional set of standard rules that are unique and only apply to this project?
So I'm going to try and answer that succinctly. So long as none of the ambiguities that might be on the face of the agreement that's reached violate the comp plan, the city is permitted to adopt an ambiguous agreement. It's not recommended, obviously. From a legal standpoint, fleshing those things out to avoid litigation down the road is the recommendation, but it would be allowed to agree to ambiguous things and argue about them later, but the recommendation is always to clear those things up on the front end.
And so if clarity was, it's kind of like the fight, go to neutral corners, come back for the next round. They come back and staff agrees with the applicant's presentation of why this independent use of residential exclusively, not forced in collective use, mixed use, residential, commercial, or like kind, that they agree. And then the developer comes forward. We review a development agreement that says, oh, you're agreeing with this now, and for good reasons, each of us have our opinion, this may be better or worse, but we all recognize staff's recommending this agreement. Agreement's the key word here. That would be preferred and certainly clearer and lead less confusion and less interpretation, as you put it, potential litigation.
Well, I think where you're going, and I see your point, I think I agree with it, is because this is a planned development agreement, we are discussing this because it's a previously granted overlay district instead of, had it been addressed as part of the development agreement, that there could be buildings, residential, condo buildings, whatever, or buildings that exceeded the 100-foot limit and went to the 150-foot limit, and that was part of the development agreement, not part of the overlay agreement, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
I think that would be correct. And you can see the benefit if the overlay district was
Right.
black and white.
Because
we wouldn't have that discussion
Because
either.
I think that's the part that I wasn't thinking about, that you did think about, that this overlay district does apply to other properties as well, and we're creating some precedent here,
Yes.
potentially, whereas if we do incorporate it as part of the development agreement, independent of the overlay district, still give you what you want, but do it in a different way, it eliminates that issue with the overlay.
Absolutely, and I think staffs, at least for my purpose, if they've heard what I've been saying, seems like they should go back to the neutral corner and come back with a maybe we give, maybe we get, maybe we both give and get.
Member Seidler.
Thank you. As speaking with that, and I'm looking under staff comment, and it says that a waterfront boardwalk with pedestrian enhancements are required to be built in order to allow a building height of 150 feet in the city's height overlay. And then buildings without the adjacent waterfront do not qualify for the 150-foot overlay. So I'm wondering, we've already established these buildings aren't on the waterfront, so they don't qualify for that max 150-foot. And I am confused why
Yeah, that's
we're
correct.
even-
That's another criteria that staff feels that this would not be able to meet. So the requirement is to provide a public walkway and associated amenities along the length of the property's waterfront on the Indian River shoreline. So that's an indication that would be required to have frontage on the waterfront for that specific.
And that's already part of the
specific
binding
property.
development agreement to provide that walkway along the shoreway.
And so it seems like there's some confusion that the buildings that you're requesting are or are not on the
The
waterfront.
property extends from the water all the way around to US 1. It's one contiguous parcel.
Okay, but the buildings that you're proposing that will exceed the height limit located along the
They
waterfront?
could be as the planning progresses, yes, sir.
But
Where
could
on
be
your-
versus will be. So how can you have a walkway that runs along the waterfront between the building if there's 18 other buildings between it and?
Because the property, the development has it.
Currently, there are homes all along there, along the
Well,
waterfront.
no, there's a whole nother section that's not developed yet along the waterfront. I think that's where the marina and
Correct.
and condo buildings were gonna go, on the
That's
the
correct.
south side of the property, before you get to the causeway, in that corner there.
Okay.
That's the area we're talking. So
And that's where the plan already has a public walkway put into, I believe it's one of the public parks and amenities that tie into the park between the single family and where the other parcel
So
extends.
your
into.
position is that's
We're
the
meeting that
qualifier for the
criteria already.
overlay, but it's not necessarily that, because then you're applying it to the entire overlay. Understand your position, I don't necessarily agree. Member Faison.
Staff, could you read that definition again about the building and the water, please?
Regarding the walkway,
No, so the criteria, as he's calling the criteria, the building height, you're saying that it doesn't have waterfront. And his position is, well, the property in general, let's say 1,000 acres, it's not 1,000 acres, I get it. But the 1,000 acres is on the water, so the property's on the water, so the waterfront walkway is on the water, but the buildings are 500 feet away from the water, or 1,000 feet from the water. You know what I mean? Like they're way back from the water. So, but because we put that walkway in on the water, we can now have the building away from the water. And that's his position, if I'm not mistaken. So
correct.
the definition, can you read it again, please?
So providing the public walkway provides a public walkway and associated amenities along the length of the property's waterfront on the Indian River Lagoon shoreline. And then there are specific standards for that public walkway to include a minimum, maximum, or minimum width, outdoor seating, shade is provided, planting trees are provided, pedestrian scaled lighting is provided.
But it does not specifically say that the building itself must be on the on the waterfront.
It references the property.
That's our point.
Staff believes that this maximum building height is applicable to individual buildings. So, yes,
But
that's.
the code says the development.
Okay.
So-
So semantics is beautiful, guys. Semantics is beautiful. All righty. So here we have it. All the other buildings that are nearing this height are actually located on the waterfront, which I believe was the intent. So now, at one point, you were specific to say that you are trying to meet the intent of the code. Now, you're going to go by the letter of the code. So I'm going to need you to pick which one you're going to do at which time.
Yes, sir. I
You're going to do
understand.
intent or you're going to do letter?
I'm just trying to go to the section and read if there is an intent section in here. And there is no intent section in the code.
No. You earlier mentioned that you were trying to conform to the intent of
Correct.
the
And
code.
in that
You
section-
said that.
In that section of the code, it's section 34-141, intent is a code provision.
Okay.
In section 29, 160 through 164, which is the height overlay district, there is no intent section setting out intent in the ordinances. So I don't know what the intent of the height
So,
overlay district
but-
was because it's not in the code.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So there is a short title. I don't know if it's going to be helpful to this discussion. But the purpose of the overlay district is to provide regulations and rules that will allow for additional height in a manner which creates more opportunities for infill redevelopments and mixed-use development while considering impacts to the existing neighborhood by directing increased building heights and intensities to major transportation corridors. The provisions of this article are in addition to, not in lieu of, other provisions of this code.
And so this is not a redevelopment and there are no existing neighborhoods. This is
So-
brand-new mixed-use development by code.
So you mentioned purpose, right, which was infill. When I hear the word infill, it's already done, right? So the purpose of this code, now, is there an applicability as well? So you mentioned purpose, is there an applicability definition? Applicability?
Well, it would be the criteria that must be met in order for this to apply? Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah, I'm going back to some other time, right? So there's always a purpose, right? And then, well, in government writing, there's, for every law, it says, for every rule, it has the purpose, and then the applicability means how it applies. And then you read that as well. Because when I just heard your purpose, right? When I heard you read the purpose, I don't know if that purpose filled, it meets this particular project. And so if it doesn't meet this particular project, how can we use it to justify what it's doing?
It does say for infill redevelopments and mixed-use developments. So it's an and. You could use either of them there.
That's
Okay,
correct.
I need to start reading. I don't have it up, so I'm not
Yeah, no, it's
reading.
understandable.
I'm not reading, so I'm just listening, and I'm trying to listen and apply. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I do tend to agree, though, the interior, because the walkway does not run across the entire piece of the property. It only runs in the section that I think everybody assumed was going to be the waterfront buildings. So going interior to the property, I think you potentially lose the whole, because it's not the whole waterway, because there's homes along there. There is no walkway that's open to the pedestrians or the general public along there. It's only in that section. So I think buildings of that height should only be allowed in that section. It's my opinion. Member Garage.
I have one last question for staff, and my memory was pricked a little bit by Mr. Fason's comment, or perhaps your comment on the Fourth Amendment. I believe I may have sat with members of this commission when the Fourth Amendment came through.
Yeah.
Why
Well,
I
I was
recall
here.
it was the first time I saw this evidence with the application to have a 150-foot building. At first blush, I was kind of shocked by that, and I'm not sure I was real supportive of it. But that's where the hotel or condominium was going to be placed at the corner, what best be described as overlooking the entrance to the Kennedy Space Center from the causeway, or across where the badge identification building used to be, if anybody's familiar with that. And that's where the walkway was. And the whole debate of the Fourth Amendment that was concerning to me, as I recall, was the large building and stipulating that the offset would be if you built this walkway. I think I recall even saying something to the extent like, that seems like a weak trade-off, a path for another 50 feet of height of building. And I think that was reviewed by us at some time.
Yeah, but I think this is actually part of the height overlay thing. I don't think it had anything to
Right,
do
but
with the Fourth.
What I'm getting to is that the presentation, it was going to be this real tall building that would stipulate to put an improvement in as an offset was the walkway. It was in that corner, what would be called the southeast corner of the development, or the southeast corner of the parcel, et cetera. It was never the whole parcel, or that the water touches the parcel all the way to US 1, and that's a fact right now. I think that's a fact. You wouldn't argue with me that the land that remains undeveloped abuts the river and US 1 and the causeway, referred to as the parcel or the development, correct? Or do you agree with me?
I wasn't around when the height overlay district was
I
passed.
wondered if you were listening. What I asked you was a question. The question I asked you is, at this time, is the parcel or the development consistent with the statement, the area in the south of the property's development site, the development, the parcel, it abuts the Indian River, US 1, and the causeway at this time, unsubdivided.
I believe that's correct.
And you're seeking that as an unsubdivided parcel, development, an area, I can use 150 feet anywhere in that described area between US 1, the causeway, and the river, because I abut the river. And if I do that, I get to build a walkway to offset that, mitigating it, making it better.
Well, it's to comply with the code. I'm not sure it's to offset or mitigate. It's to meet the criteria set forth in the
Well,
code.
that's why they have codes. They're not always just stipulations and agreements. It's also codified because someone thought it's a good idea as an offset, connectivity, walkability. So At this time, what the whole disagreement is, as opposed to an agreement, is variable. It's what you interpret, as opposed to staff's interpretation. And this body has to decide whose interpretation's right. Yet staff's recommendation is let's go back and fix the misinterpretations, lack of clarity, clarification, stipulations, and bring a development agreement forward that we're in agreement with. That'd be a good word, agreement with a development agreement.
And we feel we've done that, so we would ask for, this body to either vote to approve or deny so that we can get the city council's input on that as well. And if they deny it, then, we're back to the drawing board, of course. If they approve it, then that, was the decision that was made by the council. So I understand, we have been working with staff. We've been trying to, I think we've come into as close to an agreement as we can. We've met multiple times on this issue and others. And a lot of them you guys don't see do get worked out to complement staff on that effect. So we only come to you guys
Well, and
when we don't get there.
to the point that you guys have been working on this, I think this is, I remember at least one time recently, this was on the agenda and you pulled it right before. So obviously that was for more discussion and to try to get things worked out. So,
Yes.
I get it. And I think, I see where we're at, that, you can't just turn it back to staff and you guys to work out, because that's what you've been trying to do for the last year and it hadn't worked out. So, okay. Any more questions for the applicant before we close the public hearing? I see none. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, bring it back. And we have any more additional questions, discussions, or somebody care to make a motion? Member Faison.
Alrighty. Now, this is the staff, okay? So thank you for reading the short title. I'm now going to read for us. And then just so that, the commission, understands, on page 32, when she read the short title, the last sentence is very important, all right? Which says, the provision of this article are in addition to, not in lieu of, other provisions of this code. All right, and the reason why that's important is because as we talk about building heights overlays and whatever else, right? We have to know what the other codes say, and we kind of got to marry these two together, because if we're going to be the decision, if we're going to kind of be the third party to help out in this discussion, we have to know what we're really deciding, right? And that the overlay is not the only part of the conversation when it comes to the height, right? The other part is what does a mixed-use development say, and then how does the overlay play into that? Does that make sense? Because the word is in addition to. All right. So the word is in addition to. So my question for staff is, what is the other definition that's being used for mixed-use development that has the overlaying being applied to?
The criteria from the overlay section that describes,
Not from the overlay section, because he was stating something else. He was reading from something that was not the overlay.
Okay.
Section 37-1, the definitions for the land development code.
okay.
Do you guys understand what I'm saying now? Is that since the overlay is not the governing body, right? As it says in the purpose here, it says that this is the provision of this article are in addition to and not in lieu of. So we've been discussing something that's only to be used as addition to a policy and a provision, and not the original policy and provision that is originally written. And once we understand that, then we apply the overlay to it. Does that make sense, Mr. Garrett?
Yes. Yes.
So under the definitions, under section 37-1, mixed use, the development of a tract of land or building or structure with two or more different uses such as, but not limited to, residential, office, manufacturing, retail, public, or entertainment in a compact urban form.
Okay, so that's the definition for a mixed use. Now, I don't, because now when I apply that and I look at the overlay, I kind of I don't understand what the city's point was when they did the overlay. And now we have to kind of talk about that. You know what I mean? So now we have to apply the overlay to the original definition.
Which goes back to my point. I think this is much better served as an amendment to the agreement that directly addresses the building. They tell us how high they want a building and where they want the building, and then decide whether that's right or wrong, independent of doing it under the guise of the overlay. I think it's a much cleaner way to do it.
I like that answer.
And that's kind of along where I was saying,
Right.
with this development agreement being able to exceed the minimum, exceed the standard, that because it's an independent agreement affecting only this property,
Right.
it won't become subject to the next developer who comes in and says, well, at this hearing, P and Z members, we agreed the developer interpretation of where this applied. And I'm going to use that interpretation to say, I think the staff is reading their code wrong, because you know that, you already agreed to it.
Right.
There's an old saying about negotiating price after we come to the agreement. And so, again, I think staff's on the correct path, which I will also conclude by saying, just because you've offered a proposal in a proposed agreement doesn't mean the staff is going to agree with you. It also, conversely, may mean that you have to agree with staff. But to tell you that the only other option is deny the request seems kind of caustic to me.
Understand, but we still need a we still need a motion to deal with this. And
I'm moving off the middle of the road here. I'm going to stay with, I believe staff has heard a lot of debate tonight, and because of that, I think rediscussing the proposal so you iron out the wrinkles and bring a amended development agreement forward. And that recommendation goes to City Council, which would mean to continue this and follow staff's recommendation to allow it to mature a bit longer and then bring forward an agreement.
so, which I think has to be prefaced with, we deny it. With that recommendation,
Well, the commission's motion, second, and support is the motion of the commission, not the applicant's inference. If the applicant would wish to withdraw the application because he pending sees a recommendation, let's say he's welcome to withdraw it. Serves the same purpose.
Yeah, we don't wish to withdraw. We would like to lead tonight with either a recommendation, either direction, approval or denial, and the reasons that you guys are recommending it so that we can take it to.
no matter what, we have to move it to council. And we have to either move it with a denial with the recommendation of exactly what you
Sure.
said, or an approval that doesn't have that. So I think.
I'll change my motion since I was a motion maker, and I'll make the motion that the application be denied. The merit reason is the application's agreement is not valid. They're not agreeing to anything, so I recommend denial.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? Member Child, seems like you may want to say something.
What to
here.
do with this? Because all right, so if we deny it, we don't. If I feel like we've done all this talking and now we're not even going to give City Council like our thoughts on. Well, we would recommend approval if you consider that this isn't covered under the overlay and it's just this agreement and all the other stuff that we've talked about.
So-
I feel like that
Yeah.
I don't want to say we wasted our time because it's not a complete waste, but we're not cashing in on all this discussion.
So it would seem that you could recommend an amendment to the motion that would address on a point-by-point basis so that it travels with the denial. I think that's your point,
Okay,
is
yeah, I
that,
think,
just a blanket denial with,
Right.
because they don't meet in the middle doesn't necessarily get across the council everything. We're hopeful that they would watch this and understand our comments, but unless we
Yeah.
put it in.
It's
in the
easier to
denial,
summarize
right,
it.
yeah.
So how about a friendly amendment of denial, but with recommendation to consider the definition of the height to be considered under the agreement and not under the overlay definition? And no? Or-
Is there, you have issues with, well,
If you have
should
issues, it's not a
address-
friendly amendment.
You're asking my opinion, I'll offer my
No.
opinion. The,
No, I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, for the
I
amendment.
fully comprehend what that direction would take us in. It seems as ambiguous as we started 2.5 hours ago. The ambiguity is staff thinks black is black and the applicant thinks it's gray. And the applicant is unwilling to make a concession that in this instance it's black. I agree with staff. Staff equally is not willing to concede it's not really black, it's light black, it's almost gray. We'll go with what we agree to. That's the basis of the agreement. But to send city council a recommendation of denial, and you need to define what you mean by overlay, I think plays into my concern that I become the applicant's representative and come in and talk about, well, I'm on the river when I'm in Titusville, but I really live in Clearwater. As long as I have one parcel of land under ownership, I really qualify for that 150-foot building 140 miles away. You haven't heard anything tonight to dispute that. In fact, the applicant agreed with me. I believe that's correct.
Sorry, you
Keynote,
guys are in debate.
yes, keynote here is ambiguity, lack of clarification, and also the fact that this agreement allows it to step outside the box of rigid standards. That's why it's allowed to do this. But with ambiguity in an agreement, you're going to cast in the future interpretations of what this does to the next project. I don't think it's going to help city council. It's probably going to confuse everybody again as to where are we when we get done. What does this agreement mean? This, by interpretation, therefore it affects other development because I'm going to bring that interpretation to focus. I think council mentioned that this could be, to a degree, a precedent used later. All I'm saying is let's be black and white. If that's what we want to be,
But
and we don't want a continuance, we want a denial.
But in order to get an agreement, I mean, I know you're saying that they don't have an agreement, but don't we need to say, hey, I think we need to look at it? This is, as far as the city's position, give staff, the city council needs to give staff direction on what the staff's interpretation should be, right? Or how they should look at it. Or are you saying no, that's not?
I think the applicant's representative said it best when he said you might need to change your code. So if the impetus to this is to reflect on the vagueness of a rule that creates a question, an ambiguity that's a huge hole to dive into, my absurd example is a huge hole diving into it, then perhaps from this phoenix comes, the fire from this is the phoenix that flies with an amended code that clarifies this confused point. And that's the way it usually works, is that this development agreement sets outside the box, so to speak, and from that, city council learns maybe we need to refine our code, be more specific of what we mean, and it says a building must have 2 uses as opposed to buildings, or 2 sentences. Buildings must have 2 uses, or a building must have 2 uses. That way you kind of got them all covered. That's my thoughts on it.
And the last thing I'd like to point, not the last thing, I'll point out quite a bit, right? But if we go with the other definition and do not go with the overlay, I believe that will also remove the requirements for the boardwalk along the waterway, because that is in the overlay section. So I think we kind of have to think about that as well, right? Does it make sense? So if we go with the definition that we talked about before, that kind of allows them to build the 150 without really a lot of questions, because it's in the mixed use development, right? But in the mixed use development, it doesn't speak about the what was it, the walkway along the water?
No, I think it does.
Does it say that inside the mixed use
Yeah,
development?
because the overlay district only applies to waterfront, and it has to have it. I mean, my issue is like was brought up, that we're trying to have it both ways. It's trying
Yeah.
to qualify that
Yes.
it's overlay because there's a walkway the length of the property,
Correct.
but there's not, because most of the property has residences backing up against the water, so it is not the length of the property. But then we're trying to say we can put the building anywhere within the property because there's that there. My position would be, it needs to be right next to the walkway, if
Yes.
I'm gonna interpret it that way. But I think the bigger issue that's on the table right now is we're kicking it to council. How much of our discussion travels with when we kick it back?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's the next step, is, hopefully they'll listen to what we said. We're the recommending body to the council, but do we have to put that, all of our comments in the motion, or in the rejection? Or do we just reject it and say, listen? There's a lot. We're not used to having 5 things crammed in.
Would staff be able to summarize at least we kind of have a consensus up here of, I think, have you heard a consensus at least on some of the subjects as far as the height goes, and maybe like the wall for the 50-foot? Have you gotten any consensus from us, or?
I haven't seen any deviations from what staff has proposed that you
Right.
guys have talked about. I've seen the addition of the wall, which was that could be added to.
Yeah. Well,
Council, do you have any suggestions to get us
Not so much
home tonight?
suggestions at that point, but I just want to clarify one thing as far as definitions and precedent setting by this body is because eventually this is a contract that's entered between 2 parties, being the applicant and the commission. Any relevant interpretation in a dispute over meanings of the terms within the contract would only really look to what council understood the terms to be. So if you guys were to adopt and understand a definition tonight, that wouldn't necessarily play into any future interpretations if litigation arose because you're not a contract to the party.
So council gets us off the hook. So, council, do you have any recommendations as it relates to our desire for the council to understand our comments on A through E traveling with the motion, or do we just make the motion and let it lie?
Maybe helpful if you can agree on one as a body, what definition you think should be taken from the language that's in the contract. Recommend to council that they adopt that recommendation, but that would be the best, I think, at this stage. They could choose their own afterwards, obviously.
May I ask a question to council?
Sure.
So in light of the recommendation of denial and the proposed amended language, if the denial was based on support of staff's definition of mixed use and the failure to provide for that in this development agreement, which was mixed use within a building or buildings, as opposed to the applicant's interpretation, which isn't supported. So the denial is based on the staff's interpretation of mixed use being mixture of use within one building or buildings, but not separate, and difference with the interpretation by the applicant that definition he interprets, I don't support. So I recommend denial.
So I guess just to kind of clarify, the question is whether or not that would be a valid means for denial?
A background, a basis of my denial is, in this instance, principle, the fact that the staff's interpretation of mixed use is correct and consistent with the comprehensive plan, and I don't believe it is being illustrated in this applicant's request.
If the body's perceived definition as informed by staff's interpretation is, if you apply that, the agreement doesn't meet code requirements, that would be a means for.
That's where I'm headed, yes. So does that make sense? You wanted some clarification? Does that
Yeah, well, in thinking about it, the other thing that typically happens when we deny it is they ask each of us why we denied it. It's unusual that we have 5 different sections that we need to comment on why we denied each section, because I think the last hour we've talked primarily about A and not addressed B through E. And I think realistically, all of them kind of need to be addressed. So,
Well, we can expand that and just say the denial's based on the staff's.
well, I
Bullet
think
points.
where I was headed is we just deny it, and then they ask each of us why we denied it. It's just up to us if we want to talk on each
Works
point
for me.
independently. I don't think we deny each item individually. That, I don't think that's an option. Is it?
I mean, it would be all one action, so I would,
Right.
we
We
would
deny
prefer-
the whole thing,
correct.
and if council wants to address, but I think in our explanation of why we as an individual denied it, it's up to us if we want to give address each of the 5 sections.
And I think that's on point when you said the basis of our denial, each individual.
So, okay. So then, but then I think staff normally is the one that asks the question as to, and then that gets transmitted to council on the meetings that I've seen is, it was denied because, so. Okay, I think we're still on the motion to deny, and then we'll provide our comments after. We had a second. Any additional comments questions before we call the vote? I see none. Lori, roll call, please.
Member Garad,
Yes?
Member Scully,
Yes.
Member Seidler,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Childs,
Yes.
Secretary Faison,
Yes.
Chairman Aton.
Yes. All right.
Yes, sir, and to your point, if we could have the individual basis so we could go forward, because hopefully there's some portions of this item that the P and Z board was okay with, and maybe some that aren't. And if it's all of it no one liked, we understand.
Okay.
But
So I will go first if, I don't know whether I should go first or last, but I'll go first. So on item A, my position is I think I agree with the applicant. It could be a single use in the building that exceeds the height limit, because the development is my thing. I disagree with is that you can put the building anywhere in the development. I think the buildings that exceed the height requirement need to be adjacent to the water and adjacent to the walkway. That is the qualifying. I think that was the intent of the height relief that the overlay district granted. And it's a unique case because this is such a large development that has so many different sections that we're trying to interpret applying something that was intended for a much smaller development, something like a single condo building, and we're applying it to an entire development. So that's my position on that one. Let me get back to the section that hasn't broken up by. That was A. B is the, all right, where'd it go? Yeah,
private
B,
main?
B is the plating. I think I tend to agree that as long as staff has the control, if this helps cut through some red tape, give staff the power to review each of these proposals, and if it makes sense, that they've got the ability to do it as part of the small scale, but with staff approval, not just at the discretion of the developer. C is the landscape buffers. I think generally I'm probably okay with that. I let the market kind of dictate what it is there. D, as long as there's a wall, that acts as a safety barrier to protect vehicular traffic from US 1, to restrict it coming into that area. Generally, I think if I own the piece of property and there's a big wall back there and I want to put my swimming pool, and as a homeowner, I'm okay with it. I think that one's okay, but I think the safety wall is critical to that item. And then E, I think generally, again, maybe there's some level of staff approval as it relates to the places they can place the dirt and some, guidance as to keeping the wind from blowing it into adjacent properties and those kinds of things, which I think can be worked out. It seems to make sense that as they're digging those ponds, they can keep the dirt close by for future sections. Next, Vice Chairman.
I think I'll just agree with you, I think, on all of those. That seems correct. I like having it by the water. I think that does make the most sense when you're thinking about the intent behind the height restriction. And B, I think, I agree completely with you. Is if staff thinks that they can manage this, I think what the developer wants to do fits the intent of the rules. And I'll just say I'll agree with the chairman on the rest as well.
Somebody else want to take a stab? Have comments? We'll just go down the line. Member Seeley.
Great, thank you, since I'm,
Yeah, okay.
I'm just going to go as, I'm unclear as to the definition of what allows for the height increase on the overlay, and I agree with the walkway versus having the 150 feet back behind. I think that if it was stipulated and it was more defined, as staff has asked throughout this whole thing, is for more clarification. As I'm going through each of these, A, B, C, D, E, and I'm going to defer to staff is asking for more clarification and something where they can actually be tied to it instead of giving a general use where then we have to come back. So I recommend that they go back and submit something to us where there is definition more defined so we can take and measure off that.
Member Garad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The recommendation of denial on my behalf is predicated on three factors. The first I've extended a lot of conversation about, which is this interpretation of mixed use. I do not agree with the applicant's definition of mixed use. On the other hand, I agree that you can create a definition of mixed use within the development agreement. So further, as staff recommends, clarification is necessary to reach a maturity in this agreement. Second problem that I've had with this wasn't spoken to because some of that overlaps other problems I don't agree with staff on. I commented earlier about the dirt blowing for one reason, but in reality, the explanation by staff, it makes sense to me how they're doing it. I think it seemed to make sense to everybody for good reason, and buffering with the existing vegetation was a response to a concern on dust. That's all good stuff. It's the underlying factor, or the overarching factor, I should say, which is this subdivision deviation, in which staff's report is that that's a little too loosey and goosey to take a large-scale project like this. As you put it, Mr. Chairman, this is probably the biggest thing Titusville has going, or will have for some time, and that you want to treat it like you're doing, and the reference by the applicant tonight shocked me, the term lot split. Like I'm going to do a survey and cut this piece and that piece and go on down the road. This is more complicated than that, and that overarching issue of deviating from the subdivision process I don't agree with. So the second point of my recommendation of denial is I don't support the applicant's request in the development agreement to have what's called a simple plat, or I can't remember the terminology.
Small scale plat.
Yes, small scale plat. So those two, and then the third reason is that I can't support a disagreement where the answer on the applicant's behalf is, I'm tired of waiting, we can't come to an agreement. that word keeps coming back in my mind. It's a recommendation of this body for an agreement, not a disagreement. And time is not something that's set, I don't believe. I don't see people rushing to break the wall down and get another lot. If it was, I'd be seeing development on a scale Titusville's never seen, where by now in the 2 years I've dealt with it, that had been built out in some communities. So time, not necessarily so important to me. So, but touring this with staff is the third reason I recommend denial.
So I've wrestled with this definition, and as I continue to read over and over again the purpose, I too almost went with applicant's definition, but when I read in the purpose here, when it says that this is in addition to, that means that it's adding, not taking away from the original definition. So when we're doing in addition to the overlay, then it does restrict it. It does add that 2 into 1 building. Okay, so with that, that's my answer for A, right? And then when we go down to B, excuse me, sorry, I was just there. I went back up there again. And B is a small scale amendment. I don't have a problem with B. The only other issue that I really had, again, same thing with you, is with that dirt. Removing all of the dirt to make the water, to make those ponds. I get they want to go ahead and make that, knock that out because it's up for now. I would only agree with placing of that dirt someplace else under strict constraints. That they only clear enough land to place that dirt, to get the dirt in and out, and then they do some other things to make sure that it doesn't spread, like a water sprinkling system on it or something like that to keep that dust and debris down, and that it can't be seen from any other way but simply accessing it. So it can't be seen from the roadway, from neighboring places. It's truly hidden away, and there's a water system or something to keep that dirt tampered down. That's the only way that I would agree with that whole dirt thing, and that way it gives them a way to move forward, but prevents it from spreading.
Last but not least.
Last but not least, I'm going to agree with our chairman and vice chairman. I think you guys put it the clearest for council's easy read, because we all know they're not going to watch this multi-hour meeting, but I hope they do. But thank you.
All right. We good?
Yes, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you. It is a fantastic development. We appreciate you being here. We're trying to help things along as much as we can.
We understand everybody's got to work around the codes. They're trying to find a way. Appreciate it. Thank you all for the long discussion.
Chairman, we didn't vote yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Roll call, please. Or no, we did vote. Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we both voted.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say. Yeah. Okay. There's no public present, so we're good on second petitions and requests. City staff, any report?
No reports.
City attorney?
No reports at this time.
I have no report other than thanking everybody for the last 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 40 minutes. Good discussion. Members, member face.
March 3rd, Orlando's having a small business expo. It's free to attend. It's one of our largest small business expos in the area. So again, it's March 3rd in Orlando.
Anyone else?
Yes, I'm pleased to say that as we went through our process during the year, we had the presentation of the budget. And remember your discussion? And during that, there was a part of the presentation of Public Works that they were going to fund with the new budget a new garbage truck. And I saw the bright blue shiny new garbage truck go down my street this past week, and I was very pleased to see that because the other ones are in bad shape.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know what happened, but I assume because President's Day was a national holiday, there would be delayed trash like there usually is, and there wasn't. So I got a little grief over not having the trash out and missing the trash. Anyone else? Seeing none, we are adjourned.